Good morning, everyone. This is Lucas Lammott here at Custom Automated Prosthetics. Thanks for joining me this morning. We're going to be covering a fun topic today about intraoral photography and shade taking. This is it's a fun topic, but it can be a difficult topic also. There's a lot of things that go into shade taking and photography, and I think one of the exciting things about this is that over the last couple of years there's been some pretty cool advancements in the ways of accomplishing this for everybody's benefit. I was able to attend a very cool meeting last weekend in Los Angeles, the Bioemulation Colloquium, and I learned a lot of cool things from some masters in the industry who have dedicated their lives to, their professional lives anyway, to advancements in dentistry, whether it be on the technician side or the laboratory side or the operatory side. And you know, that's what it's all about, is learning new things and ways of making your workflow easier, more precise, to copy the nature that we're trying to copy. And so one of the things that I was made aware of out there was that traditional shade taking seems to be finally taking a turn for well, traditional shade taking is changing, and it needs to change because it's a pretty old standard, which is great. There's a lot of people that I know who are very successful with their own techniques. I've become more successful in the last few years with my techniques and my communication with my doctors, but I think that things, you know, the old norm is going to change for the better as soon as more people are exposed to some of these advancements that are coming out that I learned about this weekend. And so I'll be kind of touching base on some of those things throughout the webinar and discussing maybe the future of what's going to be coming our way. Let's see here. Let's get started. So here is my basic setup for shade taking in photography. You know, we have the classic Vita shade guide, which we'll be talking about in a little while, the 3D master shade guide, some of my ceramic shade tabs that match the ceramic that I use, which is GC Initial. And you can see in the back that's my camera. It's a pretty basic Canon DSLR with 100mm macro lens and the Canon macro twin flash, which has become essential in my shade taking and photography in general. On the left there you can see a box that says Polarized. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It's basically, it was put together and packaged by this bioemulation group, and it's essentially polarized filters that are strategically placed on the lens and both flashes, and what that does is it gets rid of any specular reflection and gives the photo almost an etched matte look. And what that does is it exposes all the little color differences and translucencies, and it just helps you figure out what you're looking at and gives you more detail. In the middle there is the Smile Line Smile Light, which has become essential in my shade taking kit, and that's a color corrected light that you can use to pick your shade tabs, whichever ones you're going to be using. You know, sometimes your lighting, whether it be in the operatory or in the lab, isn't always perfect. So this really helps helps with that. It also comes with a polarizing filter to help you correctly choose the shade tab that you think is the closest match. And so all of these things combined is a pretty basic shade taking shade taking armory, I guess you could say. And I've gotten to become very reliant on some of these things. Let's see here. So again, this is just my camera setup. I've got the EOS Rebel T6i, the 100mm macro lens, and the Canon twin flash. And a lot of people have these new Canon Mark III or Mark IV, the full frame camera bodies, which are really nice, but they're not always necessary to capture what you need for intraoral shade taking and photography. So I found that this camera works really, really well. It's relatively inexpensive. It's new. It's like 24 megapixels, which really doesn't mean that much. It's more about the sensor and all of this. So I love this camera. It's roughly $400 to $500 for the body, so it's not a huge expense versus some of the higher end full frame cameras that are $2,000 to $3,000 for the body. Perhaps one day I'll upgrade. I'm sure I will, but at this time this camera works perfectly. The most important thing is the lens, obviously, but the most important thing is the flash. It's really important to have this macro twin flash. They make it for Canon, they make it for Nikon, they make it for Olympus and several other cameras. But that's a very important feature. You can get away with maybe a 60mm macro lens. The one that I have here on the screen is the L series, which is the highest end glass, which is great, but it's not 100% necessary. The price difference between the L series and the more basic line is pretty significant. So here we have a zoom lens, and when I first started taking photographs, whether it be work on the model or whatever, that's all I had was a zoom lens, and I thought that maybe I could make do with this. Well, a zoom lens is not meant for macro photography. Some of these lenses have like a macro feature, but that's not the glass, and the lens setup was not designed for macro photography. This is designed for sports photography or taking a picture of that deer in your backyard or whatever else. It's a great lens, but it's not for what we're trying to do here. Okay, so if you have a zoom lens, that's great, but it's not going to work for intraoral photography. The other thing is the ring flash, and I know a lot of people love their ring flashes. When you go to any show, whether it be the Midwinter Meeting in Chicago or what have you, there's always a booth set up with people selling ring flashes. And I don't want to knock a ring flash completely, but for proper shade taking and accuracy, the ring flash is not so great. It does work with a lot of other things. A lot of people use it just for posterior mirror shots. And that's fine too, but with the macro flash, the twin flash that I showed you, you can, you can set that up to where you're going to get a pretty similar effect that you would with a ring flash. So it's not really necessary. The macro twin flash, you have a lot more options. You can take the flashes off the body and position them differently. You can get a bracket for the bottom of your camera, which I have. You'll see a picture of that in a few minutes, and you can set up these flashes for optimal specular reflection and exposure and all of that. So I would encourage you, whether you're a technician or a dentist, to look into getting a twin flash. If you have a macro flash or a ring flash, excuse me, that's great. But or if you're looking to get a new flash, spend the extra couple bucks and get the twin flash or the macro twin flash. You'll like it a lot better. Your photos will come out not as blown out and a lot more precise. The other thing is the cell phone. So cell phones, the iPhone, they're getting better and better with their cameras, but essentially to capture the detail and clarity and everything that goes into getting a proper intraoral photo, the cell phone is not the best. And I know you can get those little magnetic macro lenses to clip on the outside, and that might be fun for stuff at home or whatever, but it's not going to work for proper intraoral photography. So here are the camera settings. If any of you had seen my last or one of the previous webinars that I did for model photography, for taking photos of your work to to show your dentists or show clients or Facebook posts and stuff, this is all pretty much the same. I don't change much. I don't like messing around with camera settings too much, but I'll just go over these. For your flash, you want to set it to manual to 1/1, between 1/1 and 1/8. It just kind of depends on the patient and what you're looking for. But typically I keep it at 1/1 or 1/2 for intraoral stuff. You want to set your camera to manual mode. You can control everything in manual. That's what it's for. A lot of people set it to aperture priority or one of these other settings, and you could possibly get a good photo, but for a consistent technique, set it to manual, adjust everything in manual, and just leave it at that. Your white balance should be on the little flash lightning bolt symbol. We'll talk a little bit more about white balance later. Your shutter speed should be about 1/25 of a second. Looks like my D got cut off on my PowerPoint here, but that says second, not second. Your aperture should be set at f/22. This measures f-stops, which is the opening that lets the light into your camera, and your ISO should be 100. And this might vary for each camera or each camera that you have. I think Nikon's go down to 125 or something like this, but essentially you want to shoot for the lowest ISO that you can. And this is just basically a measurement of how sensitive the sensor of your camera is to the light. So all of this works together with your flash to get you the optimal photograph. Okay, so yeah, here's the smile light that I was talking about earlier. This is essential in my setup for sure. And basically what this does is, instead of taking a photo of every shade tab that you think might work, this will give you a really good visual, and you can just go through your selection of shade tabs and find which one or which two or which three, however many you need to work with. And again, you put that polarizing filter there on the bottom, and it really helps assist with finding your shade. And it's been proven that after a human stares at a specific thing or color, I don't remember how many seconds it was, but it was maybe 20 seconds, you start to go colorblind a little bit, and your eyes really get fatigued. So if you have this long shade-taking appointment, it's quite exhausting because you're looking at all aspects of the tooth that you're going to match, and we need all the help that we can get to keep our eyes fresh and focused on what we need to do. So this is a really great tool. Again, this is the Polarized. This is what it looks like in the box. It comes with these little magnets that you put on your camera flash and on your camera lens. They're very small. It's not going to ruin anything or affect your camera for anything else you might want to use. So you just clip those on with the magnets, and you can pop them off and put them back in the box and keep them nice and clean. But this has been my most favorite accessory to my camera over the last, I think I got it maybe, a few months ago I got it. And I love taking all sorts of pictures with these lenses just to get the different effect. And it's a lot of fun if you have any extracted teeth to, you can set them up on your bench and take some pretty cool shots with those, and just really see all of the different effects and the colors and the chromas and the values that go into a natural tooth. And it's exciting, but it can actually be overwhelming as well, because obviously these are things that we're trying to mimic and copy in our restoration. But if you look at it as a learning tool as well as a practical tool for shade taking and the study of natural dentition, it's well worth it. So here is about half of what I have in my drawer for shade taking. It's a little overwhelming sometimes. It's hard to look at a tooth in the mouth and say, that's definitely an A3.5 or a 210 chromoscope shade or whatever. Sometimes we have to use our best judgment, and we have to skip around from shade guide to shade guide. My favorite is actually, I don't have a cursor here, so I can't scroll over it, but the darker shade guide to the top right-hand corner is an old Pearl Effect Ivoclar shade guide, and that is, they've discontinued this older model. I actually found a brand new one on eBay. I paid like $30 for it, which isn't too bad, but this one that I have here was a kind of beat up, and I wanted something a little bit newer to add to my repertoire here. So, but that's got some beautiful Pearl Effect opalescence, and it's a really nice shade guide. And I'll use anything chair side, whether it be the stump shades or the initial shade guides, porcelain tabs, to if someone has a very strong blue or gray incisal edge, I'll match that effect tab or the shade tab that matches that effect. And obviously, when we're taking a shade, we want to take photos, but we also want to write everything down. So make yourself a little chart with an outline of some teeth, make copies of it, keep it in a folder, and you write the patient's name down and take notes as necessary. You might be noticing the pack of gum sitting there. My good friend and doctor that I work with, Miles Cohn, he and I are doing a lot of custom shade tabs, and when we can't find anything that's even close, I say, I don't know, take a piece of bubble gum or chewing gum. If that matches, send it to me, and I'll match it to that. So it really doesn't matter. It could be a shoelace or whatever, so long as it matches or gives you an idea of where to go from there. Now, this is the Vita Classic shade guide. I think we're all familiar with this. It's pretty much the standard. I've never been into a laboratory anywhere in the world and not seen this shade guide laying around someplace, or several of them. The interesting thing is that this Vita Classic shade guide was introduced originally in 1968, I believe, or it might have been 66. On their website it says it's been around for 50 years, so whether that's up to date or not, I'm not really sure. But if you think about that, we've been using the same standard for shade taking for 50 plus or minus years, and with all the advancements in dental technology, you would think that as far as shade guides in general, we would have developed a new way of taking shades, and I think that that's well underway now. I know there's been a lot of programs and special cameras throughout the years that they're supposed to assist in picking a shade, and I think some of them work very well, but I don't think any of them are a complete answer or a complete solution to picking an accurate shade. So this is an interesting photo, and this is a snapshot of a lecture when I was in Los Angeles. Mr. August Ruggero was talking about shade tabs and batch discrepancies, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But this is a standard Vita tab spliced in half with different measurements of what's going on, and it's pretty eye-opening. You know, each one is made practically the same. I mean, they all measure the same thickness of what would be the body and the dentin and the incisal, and that's great and all. But if you are willing to think outside the box a little bit and look at a natural tooth, there's a lot more going on within a natural dentition than a three-layered plastic or composite shade guide. It's nothing but a color swatch or a tab. So it's important to think outside the box when it comes to your shade selection. And after you find that closest match, and all the similarities and everything you need, you have to really focus on what is not included in that shade guide. It's good to find a beginning point, and once you find that, it's good, but then you have to start thinking about, okay, what do I need to change about this? Because there is no single shade tab that perfectly matches natural dentition. And quite frankly, there is no shade tab that perfectly matches an older restoration that you might be trying to match, because it could have been another technician last year or 20 years ago who made that ceramic or made that restoration, and his interpretation of a single shade tab or multiple shade tabs is going to be different than yours. So teeth are in many ways like fingerprints. Everybody has different nuances, different translucencies and opacities and colors and chromas, and you know, I mean, the list is endless of details that you need to pay attention to. So, not to sound snarky or anything, but when you get a shade for a single anterior, especially, or even multiple anterior restorations, and it says A2, you need to have more communication with your doctor about that, and you know, don't say what is an A2. You need to discuss it with your doctor and discuss taking photos and a closer assessment of that. Let's see here. Batch discrepancy. This is something that I've been doing a little bit of reading about, and a lot of the lectures that I've been to have talked about this. And what batch discrepancy is let's use the Vita shade guide for an example. It's been used for 50 years. So, you know, we've had different versions of that. We've had the Classic and the Lumen and all of this. But essentially, they're trying to tell you that an A2 is an A2. And so when you get a case that says A2 or A2A3 or a variety of different shades on your prescription, or even when you get a photograph from a doctor, it's important to understand that with these hundreds of thousands of shade guides and shade tabs that have been made over the years, the discrepancy between each one can be actually very visible to the human eye. And so if you have a doctor that sends you a photograph of A2 and he has a Vita Classic shade guide or a Vita shade guide that's 10 years old, it is going to be much different than your newer shade guide, or vice versa. And that being said, even if you both bought, the doctor and the technician bought a shade guide at the same time, in the same order, from the same company, and you get them, there's a very good chance that the accuracy between one A2 and the next, or whatever shade it might be, there's a very good chance that those are going to be different. And it's those subtle differences that can really affect your outcome in a negative way. So here's a photograph that Mr. Sasha Hein gave me permission to use. It was a batch discrepancy test that he was running using an A3. And you can see just by looking at these 5 A3s that were all from modern shade guides bought at the same time, there are subtle differences. There's not a lot of difference, but there's enough to where it could really affect what you're trying to do. And any color measurement with a difference between 2 and 4 is perceivable to the human eye, and you can see in the little chart to your right that there are some big differences, and some of those are quite obvious when you look at them even with the human eye. So that's a problem. That's something that we need. That's a hurdle and a challenge that we need to overcome. So let's get down to the actual technique of shade taking in intraoral photos. I've been in the lab business for a long time, and I've gotten a lot of photographs over the years. Some of them have been great, some of them have been not so great. Typically, the ones that are not ideal are the photos where the doctor is wearing possibly blue latex gloves, and he's sort of retracting the teeth, or the lips, excuse me, the lips with his fingers and then holding a shade guide up there. Those are typically the photos that don't help me very much. It's very necessary to retract the lips of the patient to get those out of the way, and that's where the patient will come in handy, and you can sort of help them with their comfort level by allowing them to control these retractors. These are the retractors that I have in my lab that I use often. They're autoclavable and cleanable and all that stuff, and they're relatively cheap. I think I found these on Amazon for maybe 15, 20 bucks, and there's all sorts of different ones out there, the plastic ones, and some of them sort of self-retract. They've got, like, they're connected and they sort of spring outward, so the patient has to do very little to control his comfort level and the positioning of the lips so they're out of the way so you can take a clear photo. So definitely retraction is very necessary, and if you're a lab guy who gets custom shades, get a couple of these, and like I said, they're easy to clean, easy to store, and they're so inexpensive that there's really no excuse not to use these. Okay, so here is a photograph that I put together for my last photography webinar, and it's just showing the angulation of the flashes and the lens with the teeth that you're taking, the patient's mouth. And this is pretty much what you want your setup to look like. You want your flashes and your lens to be pointing to sort of a 0 point to get that specular reflection where you want it to be. And this is where the bracket for the flash comes in really handy. You can see it in the photo. It's Winfotech, made in Germany, and these you can find on eBay or PhotoMed or a lot of different places. And there's some new ones that are coming out, so keep an eye out for those. It's a fixed flash bracket, so you don't have to worry about repositioning your flash for every photo, because after a while the joints on these brackets do sort of wear out, and so if you bend over too far, then then your lenses will, or your flashes will sort of fall, or not fall, but slouch and move around. This is the angulation of the teeth that you would like, that's for optimal results. A slight upward angle from the patient. You don't want to be shooting the teeth from an upward angle, because then you'll get a lot of the specular reflection on the incisal edge, and what that does is it takes away all of the detail from that incisal edge, because it's blown out with a flash, but it also sends that that flashlight through your enamels and your dentins, and you're not, they're bouncing around in there and coming back to you, and you're not really getting an accurate description of the tooth that you're matching. So it's really important to get that proper angle. And what I usually do is, whether it's in the lab or in the operatory, if I'm going to the doctors to take that shade for them, I will, first thing I do is I have the patient sit up on the side of the chair, depending on their height. If it's I'm a pretty tall guy, but if I'm taking a photo of a guy who's a few inches shorter than me, I might actually have him stand in front of me. Make sure, for all you technicians out there, that when you're in the position of taking a shade, that's your game there. So it's important for you to position the patient to your comfort level also, and to where you can get your optimal angles and all of that. We want to keep the patients comfortable as well, but it's you can do that and have them get out of the chair if you want. There's a lot of ways of doing that. If you take that photo from the side when they're laying or reclined back in the chair, it's much harder to get that angle. You have to have the patient turn his or her head to you, and then you have to sort of bend over and twist and try to get that angle. So make things as easy on yourself as possible by finding that comfortable position for both you and the patient to get that optimal angle. And what I've done is, and it's really worked well for me, is I find different people that I work with, or in the same building as me, people that I feel comfortable enough to ask if I could practice on them, and especially if they have unique dentition. Us technicians can become obsessed with looking at other people's teeth, during a conversation, which can be kind of odd when the other person doesn't know what you're doing. But go up to that person and say, hey, you've got beautiful teeth. Can I take your shade, or can I take some intraoral photos? Assure them that they're not going to go on Facebook, of course. That's a complete lie. You're going to put them on Facebook and show how awesome they are. But don't, always ask their permission to use it, obviously. Whether it's a patient or a friend, to say, hey, I want to show off your cool, unique dentition, and whatever. It's all good. But I do this all the time. I have countless photos of people's teeth, that not because they need a restoration, just because they have very unique teeth, and it can be a learning tool. But through doing that, you're going to find your perfect angle, your perfect technique of getting these shots. And I think that's really, really important. You could have the best camera setup in the world, and the most expensive and the fanciest, and if you don't take that photo at a proper angle and with the proper settings, it's not going to do you any good. So practice, practice, practice all the time. If you have kids, practice on them, because they move around a lot. So it's harder for them to sit still. So I take photos of my daughter's teeth all the time, just because she's a little fidgety, and it's kind of like a workout in a way. So here's Elizabeth. She works upstairs from CAP here. She is one of the receptionists. She's a very cool lady. She's a mother. Always has a smile on her face. And so I said, hey, I need someone to to take photos of for this webinar, and could I take photos of your teeth? And she was kind enough to say yes. So one thing that I like to do also is I've got a few different lenses for my camera, and a few different flashes and diffusers and all of this. So I like to, if I'm taking photos of someone's teeth just for fun or for practice, I say, hey, you know, I'll let me take a cool headshot of you, or you know, sort of an artsy photo you can use for your Facebook profile picture, or whatever you want to use it for. And so that's a lot of fun too, because I think that basic portrait photography is really important in you know, your shade taking as well, because it's not all about the teeth. It is, but it's also about the lip line, the smile line, the shape of the patient's head, skin tone, the whites of their eyes, all of these things. So as you can see in this next picture here, I've got a picture of her straight on, and then a lateral side view of the right and the left. And this is actually more helpful than you might think, especially if you're doing multiple restorations. It's good to see her natural smile line, to see where the lips fall on the tooth, how much she exposes of you know, of her dentition, and the side view helps to see the angulation of anterior teeth, and it's just, I think on a different note for me also is it puts a little bit of humanity, not humanity, but it makes it a little bit more personable when you can see the patient's face, get them to give you a real smile. You know, I always pretend to be Austin Powers taking photos, and that usually gets people laughing, and a good smile, and or have them say spaghetti over and over again. It usually leads them into a natural smile. And so when I'm making this restoration, it's I'm constantly seeing this person's face, and it helps me bridge the gap between this huge divide between technician and patient that often exists. So here's just a close-up photo of Elizabeth smiling. I always take one of these, a natural smile. In retrospect, I should have captured maybe all of, you know, the whole mouth, all of the lips. But you know what? Every case that I take photos of, or every case that I work on, at the end I always say, oh, I wish I had you know, this photo, or I wish I had taken this you know, this angle. And so what I'm currently doing for myself is putting together a checklist of everything that I need for each patient that I see, and I think that's a really good idea for all of you guys as well. Have it hanging up in your lab wherever you do your custom shades, and so you can go through that list and get every angle and every photograph that you need before you send the patient home. Oftentimes the patient will, you know, drive a long ways, or you know, it's inconvenient for them to come to your lab, so it's very important to get everything that you need on the first visit, because in reality, you know, they can't always just come back. You know, it'd be nice if we could see them every day, and have a, you know, do a try-in of our restoration every day and see everything. And sometimes it's more possible, but oftentimes it's, you know, we're all busy, we all have to work. So it's important to capture everything that you need to in that first visit. So this is how I take a photo for basic shade taking. You can see she has her retractors in that she's controlling with her hands. I just simply sort of tell her where I need her to position everything, and I go through my shades, shade tabs, and I pick out the ones that I think are closest. And when I'm picking out my shade tabs, I often pick out a shade that's too light or too dark, or the value's too low or the value's a little too high, and I take a photo of that as well. That way I can see where I have to draw the line as far as you know, hue, chroma, and value. On the next picture, you'll see a picture of the B1 shade tab, and it's not quite right, but it'll be useful to me because I'll know where not to go or where my limitations are with this shade. Elizabeth is very close to an A1, but if you study this photo, you can pick out many things that are not an A1. Towards the cervical portion of her tooth, she's got a much higher value than the cervical portion of the shade tab. She's got light hypocalcification, which a lot of people do. She's got very subtle effects and striations going through her tooth, but an A1 was a good starting point. Now, one thing that I learned several years ago from a friend of mine and very talented technician, Thomas Singh, is that you should hold your shade tab at this horizontal position. And there's two reasons for that. One is when you're holding up a shade tab in the mouth, you have a long way to go between the actual shade tab and the color or the shade marking itself on the shade tab, the identification of what you're using. A lot of technicians will they have like a code, or they'll etch or they'll cut little grooves into each shade tab, and the pattern of those grooves tells them what shade it is. That way they can get closer with their camera. But I'm not going to go through and cut up my shade tabs at this point. So by holding it more at an angle, you have more room to get that A1 or whatever the shade is, that label in your photograph, and that way you it's just one less thing you have to think about. It's A1. It's right there and it's clear. The other reason, and the most important reason for me, is the distance between the incisal edge of the shade tab and the incisal edge of the adjacent tooth or the tooth that you're going to be matching. And then the shortest distance between the body, the most chromatic colored portion of the tooth, and the chromatic body of the shade tab. And what this does is it allows your eyes to move less. It's less of a workout for your eyes. You don't have to look way up to the gingival portion and then all the way down to the shade tab, and then the same with the incisal portion. It's right there. It's close, and quite frankly, it works. I mean, I've been doing this for a few years, and recognizing a shade is much easier as well. Because when you have that shade tab and the gingival portion or the cervical portion of the shade tab is butted up against the incisal portion of your tooth that you're matching, your eyes are going all over the place trying to find what that might, the closest match. So if you haven't tried this, try it. I guarantee that it's going to help you out a lot. So here's a picture of the B1. It's a little low value. You know, a lot of people think that B1 is the brightest shade in the shade guide for the Vita Classic. It's not. A1 is actually the brightest. Some people say it's actually D2 or B2, but it's not. It's A1 is got the highest value and is the brightest shade to choose from. B1 has a lower value. So here you can see that even though the A1 shade tab was slightly more chromatic, and so you would think, oh, maybe I'll go a little bit lighter and try a B1. Here it's fairly obvious that a B1 is too dark, too low value, which means too gray, and won't be suitable for a starting point for this restoration. So here's the A1 photo with the Polarized. the filters on the lens and on the flash. And right away, I think you can see that there's a lot more going on in Elizabeth's tooth than the specular photo or the standard photo was showing us. There's a lot of stuff that we can learn from this technique of using these filters. Yeah, it's one more tool to use to make our job easier, especially if it's a single anterior restoration, which is the hardest in the mouth to do. And then what I like to do is also convert that into a black and white photo. And basically, if you have Keynote or Aperture or even a basic version of like iPhoto or whatever you're using, just take the saturation all the way down. That's all you have to do. Don't put any black and white filters in there. I mean, you can if you want to play around with it, but just to get a basic black and white photo, you can just drop the saturation to 0. You know, maybe you can play with the contrast, bump that up a few notches, but this helps me to see the value level of the tooth and the shade tab, and you know, this tells me that A1 is the closest thing, or near the closest thing to use for this. Another thing you can do is in Photoshop, which I am not a Photoshop guru by any stretch of the imagination. I like to get photos off of my camera and do minimal adjusting. I don't do a lot of landscape photography and you know, outside and play with it in Photoshop. I keep it very basic. But one thing that you can do is if you drop the saturation in Photoshop and then you go back to the original photo, or you click on the original photo, it's still black and white. You can go in there with an eraser and you erase that black and white effect or the saturation, and it's kind of odd because it shows you how orange it really looks, I guess, with but it's all perception. It's just the contrast. It also shows you that on a lot of teeth, or many teeth, when you look up towards the cervical portion of the tooth, there's a lot of pink, and that pink is coming from the gingiva, obviously. So this is all things that you need to keep in mind when you're taking a shade of is that pink actually in the tooth, or is it a reflection from the gingiva? You know, it really varies patient to patient, but this is a good way of checking things like that and seeing you know, where you're at and where you need to go, and adjustments with your ceramic mixture or your stain mixture that you need to make. So this is a photo that is taken with the Polarized as well, with a gray card. Actually, before I get into that, I'm actually going to back up here, and I want to explain something that I forgot here that's very, very important, and that is, along with the position of the shade guide being at this horizontal plane, the depth of, not the depth, but the position buccally and lingually, I guess you could say, is equally as important. Oftentimes I'll get a photo, or I'll even take a photo, you know, because you're holding a camera and a shade tab in one hand, and it's one of those things where you've got to find your position and take a photo pretty quickly, because the camera gets heavy, the patient's moving slightly, and what will happen is that shade tab will do one of two things. It will fall behind the incisal edge of the tooth that you're matching. So the incisal edge of the tooth is actually overlapping your shade guide, or the shade guide comes too far forward, and depending on your point of focus, which should be the tooth, but you know, with everything moving around, if that shade tab isn't almost perfectly in line with the natural tooth, it's going to be either out of focus just slightly, or your values are going to change and your exposure is going to change because it's either closer to the flash or farther away from the flash. So it's really important to position that right under the tooth. I don't like to have it touching the tooth because then it's affecting the incisal edge and that translucency. You're providing a sort of a fake halo effect. So it's important to have it just under the tooth, but positioned right under to where it's in line with the other teeth. So here's the gray card. This is something that I'm starting to play with. I mean, gray cards have been around for a long time. They're meant for white balancing a photograph, whether it's portrait photography or you know, when you're shooting a video, you know, you always have that guy run out there with the gray card and check the white balance and all of that. So this is the gray card that I have. It's not the best one, but it is it will work for now until I upgrade. There'll be a new gray card from PhotoMet hopefully coming out at the end of this month or next month. That is Sasha Hine and some of the other people. Dr. Panos from Greece they've worked on perfecting getting the exact percentage of gray in a gray card to get a perfect white balance. So I'm looking forward to getting that. But for now, this YBAL, www.ybal.com, you can get these, and they're very good. They're certainly work for white balance. So let me go back to that. So to get this photograph correctly, you want to place the gray card directly under the incisal edge of the teeth, and that way it's in focus, you know, with the dentition. And I took this with the Polarized, so I'm not dealing with specular reflection. I'm getting a very neutral gray flat effect, and I don't have to worry about light and specular reflection affecting my white balance. So you can also do this with the shade tab. It depends on what technique you're going to be using. I like to take a variety of photos so I can go back if I think one will work better than the other. And then, you know, when you have the patient with you, take all the photos that you need, write that checklist, and that way you have it on hand and you can reference back to any of them. So if you have Keynote, excuse me, if you have Lightroom, and this is something that I just learned to do, unfortunately the GoToWebinar control panel is covering my photo, so I'm going to exit out of this real quick and move it, and we'll go back into it. Move it down here. Okay. All right, so basically what you do is you import your photo into Adobe Lightroom. It's pretty cool. If you have a Mac, great. If you don't, you should get one. It's far easier to do this stuff on a Mac than it is on a PC, in my opinion. And Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop come for 10 bucks a month, and it's all cloud-based, and you can just download it onto your computer. For 10 bucks a month, it's I've already gotten my use it's paid for itself for sure. Very small price. But basically, you'll import your photo into Lightroom, and what you do is you simply go over to that little eyedropper on the right below treatment, and you click on that, and you scroll over, and I select a portion of the gray card that is underneath the tooth. It can really be anywhere, but I get as close to the tooth as possible without going over the edge, and you click on the gray card, and it's a simple procedure. It calibrates your photograph, and it's white balanced. And that means you're getting a very true color. You know, what you see in real life and what is on the screen is very, very close. And then what I've just learned to do, so I'm just repeating stuff that I've just learned, and this is all part of a new shade taking system that's out there that I'm really, really excited about, called the eLabor system. And I'm not going to go through that because I would be blowing smoke, because I haven't done it enough to teach it by any stretch of the imagination. But just to get a accurate white balanced and exposure photo is pretty easy. So easier than I thought. So everything is, all color is measured on an LAB value. L is the luminosity, A is the red, and the B is the yellow. And basically any color can be made up with a mixture of these. And so to get the correct exposure value for a white balanced photo like this, you simply scroll back over to the gray card, and what will happen is when you're on, scroll over the same spot that you clicked on to white balance, and when you scroll over that, the histogram up in the right hand corner will change, and you can set this histogram very easily in your settings to the LAB. You can see the LAB values right below the histogram, and right there they are set to 78.8. For the luminosity, A is -0.1 and B is 0.5, which is very close. A perfect exposure for a white balanced photo is L79, A0, and B0. So these, you know, if I worked hard at it, I could probably find maybe a slightly better exposure. But what you do is when you scroll back over to that gray card, actually, first of all, what you want to do is you want to click on the exposure meter, so it turns blue there, and then you scroll back over to where you selected on the white balance card, and you leave it, and you just use your arrow keys, and you adjust up or down that exposure until your histogram is as close as possible to L79, A0, and B0, and then you have a white balanced, perfect exposure photograph with no specular reflection, and that is pretty much the first step towards this new shade taking system developed by some very intelligent, excellent technicians and doctors. I think this is going to be the future for shade taking, but for now we need to concentrate on photography skill and technique, and in my opinion, uniformity. So one patient has the same angle, canine to canine, than the next patient that you're taking photos of, and I think this is very important to the ease and workflow of what you're doing. Okay, so this is kind of a little diagram here to show what the LAB stands for. B being the yellow, A red, and then L is the luminosity. There's some really great YouTube videos on this. If you just Google Sasha Hine eLabor aid, it will come up, and he walks through it and makes it very, very clear and very, very easy. So check that out. This is the final photo. Of course, you know, I've played with this a little bit to make it look a little bit more. You can adjust saturation and contrast and all this to really get some of those effects to pop out. And I like to do that. If you play with your settings after you've taken your shade, it really helps expose some of these other effects. And it's like I always say, you know, when you've got a bucket of water, it's made up of drops of water. So every drop that you can put into creating the best restoration possible is necessary. And so with photographs like this, you can explore and find these other little tidbits that will help your restoration come look more natural. And you know, at the end of the day, we're trying to make we don't want our patient to think, oh, I have a nice crown. We want our patient to forget that they have a crown or forget that they have veneers and think that they're natural. It's a hard thing to do, but that's what we do, right? So basically, that's the end of the webinar, and I'll take some questions. But on a final note, I think it's it's all about practice. It's all about finding a passion for getting the best result possible and taking the time to learn it. In the age of a lot of great advancements in dental technology, we can do things a lot faster, and that can be a really good thing. But don't forget to practice and take the time to learn some of these more technique-sensitive techniques. So all of these things will help you become a better technician and see color better and match color better, and ultimately give the patient what they deserve and what they're paying for, and that's it. So I will escape out of here, and I will bring up the questions. Okay, so I'm back with questions. I'm going to start here. Let me readjust my screen. Okay. First question is from Dimitri. What is your way to pick up modifiers for a regular straight shade? Let's see. Well, for a straight, I guess if I'm understanding you correctly, obviously, when we pick our shade tab and there is, we're getting the color and the hue picked out. Some patients can have a very strong translucent line angle or effect in towards their incisal edge. If that's what you mean, the best way for me to pick up those modifiers is to simply use, whatever ceramic system that you're using. I go through those, and if it's a gray or clear or blue or opalescent, I find those shade samples that I have, and I'll simply take photos, a photograph with that specific shade tab or ceramic tab in the photo next to the effect I'm trying to match. There's also another really cool tool that you guys can use called Visualize, and that's also part of the bioemulation group. That's what they use, or something that they've sort of reformulated. And they've reformulated it so it's not poisonous to your body, which is a good thing. And basically what that is you burn out the dry, you take your dry ceramic, and if there's any pigment added to it, like a pink or an orange, you burn that out, you put it on a tray, you burn it out dry at a fairly low temperature, and you mix this. It's like a buildup liquid. It's almost like a stain liquid, actually. It's very thick. But when you add this to your ceramic, it shows you an almost exact replica of what that ceramic is going to look like when it's fired. So it's pretty cool. You can actually build up your crown or add on your effects and see what they're going to look like before you even fire it. And so that's one way I like to see what effects I need to use and how I pick those. Okay, let's see. Okay, Eric Rounds asks, are you guys going to have this webinar made into a video? Would love to show my doctors. Yes, it will. It is being recorded. It will be on YouTube channel. So go over to the CAP YouTube channel, Custom Automated Prosthetics. It'll probably be up there probably tomorrow, I would think, right? Tomorrow, yeah. This week, it'll be up there this week. But yeah, definitely, definitely share it. And quite frankly, what I would love to learn from you guys as well. If you guys have anything to add to this or anything that I might have missed that I'm ignorant to, there's plenty of things that I don't know that I'm hungry to learn. Definitely hit me up on Facebook or shoot me an email and just say, hey, you forgot this, or hey, what about this, and tell me about it. I would love to hear your technique and anything that can make my technique that much better. Let's see. Okay, Mario Ramiro asks, the last image shows a polarized photo. Do you think that it is always necessary to communicate with your lab? I don't think it's always necessary. I mean, this is a fairly new thing for me. You know, I mentioned before my good friend and dentist, prosthodontist Miles Cohn, bought this this filter system, the Polarized, probably a year ago, and I'm telling you, since he's been sending me photos of his patients with that, along with the more standard photos, it's been a huge help. And it's not necessarily showing me what shade I need to use or whatever. It's exposing everything that you can't see with a standard reflective photograph, because you lose a lot of the detail in those reflective photographs. And so I went ahead and I bought the same filter kit for me in my lab, and so when I have patients come to see me, then I use that as well. And it's just another tool that makes things that much easier. It's relatively inexpensive. I mean, it's never gonna wear out. It's something you can use on your camera for a long time, and it comes with extra little magnets too. So if you upgrade your camera, upgrade your lens, you can just add those other magnets on there. And they make a special one for Canon or Nikon. They do make it for ring flashes as well. You don't have to have a twin flash, and that works okay, but or it works well. But to get that uniform specular reflection photo and then polarized photo and have them both be the same, then I think it's a good idea to get that twin flash. So is it necessary to communicate with my lab? It's not necessary, but it's a huge help. And I think the cost is like $300 to $400. And like I said, it's not going to wear out. You're not going to have to replace it unless you, they break or you drop them or step on them or there's a bad scratch in them. Sorry for the long answer. I hope that answered your question. Okay, so Stephen is asking me about the position of the flashes on my camera. So let's see, 80 degrees, it doesn't even matter. It does matter. Preferably it's like a 45 degree to 45 degree angle, if that makes any sense. I try to keep them at the same angle and the same position for every patient. And I think that that's a good idea. Like I said earlier, the brackets can move, and when I'm storing my camera, I fold those brackets up so I can store my camera even easier. And so I've got to make some marks, or yeah, actually that's what I do is I take like a silver Sharpie, and when I found that perfect position, I mark it with a silver Sharpie so I can put it back to that same position. but I'll be completely honest with you. You know, sometimes it's not as uniform as I would like it to be, which I think is why when this other flash bracket comes out and you can't move it. It's stationary, so your flash is always going to be the same no matter what, so long as you you know, position your camera to the patient the same way every time. You know, some of these gray cards have measurement devices on there, and so that's a good tool to use to make sure that your photos are always uniform and accurate. You know, canine to canine. Oftentimes I like to go first by to first by. That way I'm encapsulating the entire anterior region the way I want. Okay. Okay. Good question from Martin York. What about using diffusers that attach to the stock flash like the ones PhotoMed offers? I meant to mention diffusers earlier, but I forgot, so thank you for the reminder. As far as the stock flash, I'm assuming that's the one that pops up in the front. Rule number one for shade taking in general is don't use a diffuser. You want to use a naked flash. You want it to be a pure light source with no diffusion, no satin effect. It's great for Facebook. It's great for you know, if you're working on a publication and you want that really sexy, you know, nice photo, then definitely, you know, use diffusers all you want. But for shade taking, it's not advised. You're not getting a good representation of what that tooth actually looks like. It's changing. As far as using a stock flash, which I'm assuming is the overhead flash, what that's going to do is it's going to shoot a straight flash towards your two centrals, straight on, and it's just going to hit those teeth and bounce back at you, and you're going to, what I refer to, drowning out any of the detail that you want to see. And then using a diffuser, it might make it look a little bit better, but then you're also altering the surface texture and the luster and the a lot of detail that you want to see. So I would not recommend using an overhead stock flash. You know, if I had the choice, I certainly wouldn't. Okay. The name of this Dave Mai, I believe that's how you pronounce your last name, asks, what's the name of the shade technician, Sasha? Yeah, Sasha Hein, S-C-H, A-S-H-A, I believe, H-E-I-N. He's a very nice gentleman and very willing to share his techniques, and right now he's in Brazil. He's flying all over the world doing different shade taking courses. Okay. Anna Katoka, sorry if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, but Anna asks if I have ever had the chance to work with Shofu's I Special 2, specifically the isolate shade mode. I'm sorry, I haven't used that. I know Vita has, you know, their own shade matching system. There was an old shade matching system called the X-Rite Shade Vision, which I used for years and years and years, which was actually not bad. I had a lot of success with that, but they discontinued the camera. They don't even make the battery for it anymore. It's a dinosaur. In fact, I have one sitting in the back of my lap in a storeroom in a box someplace, and it only runs on PC. So, but anyway, there's a lot of different ones out there, and I think a lot of them can be beneficial, but I have a feeling that some of the new advancements coming up are going to be really mind-blowing. I've seen the results from this. In fact, it's on Facebook. You can find the page. It's the official Labor Aid Facebook page, and you can go on there and see this technique that people have been using. And it's really pretty remarkable. And of course, you need to, there's a learning curve. You need to learn how to use the software, and you also need to know how to translate these different LAB values and translate that into your ceramic. I've just scratched the surface of it. I like to understand something completely before I dive into the middle of it, especially on a live case. So, but keep an eye out for it. It's definitely going to be cool. Teeth dehydrating. Dave Smart asks, this is really important. Thank you for bringing that up. It's interesting, and one of the lectures that I do with Dr. Miles Cohn is we show a single anterior that we did that was probably the hardest restoration I've ever done in my life. It was very challenging, but we did it, we got it, and one of the points that we talk about in our lecture is the importance of taking that stump shade or that natural dye shade after the tooth has been prepped. And we have a before and after of right after the tooth is prepped, right? So you've got all this, you've got the Novocaine, which is, white. It makes the tissue look white, it chases the blood away. And then, the patient's mouth has been open for an hour, 2 hours, or however long it's been, and breathing through his mouth, and you've got the air and all this stuff. And when you see the shade of that stump or that preparation, 20 minutes after prep or immediately after preparation, and then you see it 72 hours later after it's dehydrated, even with a temporary on, the difference is astronomical. It really, once that blood comes back, because you got to remember too that blood runs through the pulp of the tooth, so it's there's a lot of life in there. There's a lot of color running through there, and so when that's sort of scared away or blanched away from the anesthesia or dehydration, all the moisture is gone. It definitely changes the shade of the tooth. Just an interesting side note, due to hormonal differences in humans between the morning and the evening and the afternoon, it's been proven that your gingiva shade, that the color of the pink tissue, your gums, change throughout the day due to these different hormonal shifts that everybody goes through. And it's pretty far out when you really think about it. So, it's a little off topic from dehydration, but I mean, there's a million different things that go on and that can change throughout the course of the day. So, dehydration is definitely an issue. When all that moisture is gone and it's dried out, you definitely get different values and different chromas and things, different opacities. Everything changes. So. When I'm doing an in-house shade evaluation with a patient, I offer them some water, of course, at first, and then, I'll pick their shade, and then, I'll say, okay, take the retractors out, relax, and then I'll take some notes or whatever. And so a lot of patients find it kind of irritating that they have to take these retractors in and out, but if I'm spending 10 to 20 minutes or even longer with a patient to try to get this shade, the last thing I want is for them to sit there with their lips retracted, mouth breathing for half an hour, because it will make a big difference. So yeah, definitely get your patient to close close their mouth and rehydrate sort of as needed. Okay, I think, let's see, questions. I think that's it for questions. I don't think I've missed anything. I think so. So, all right, so if there are no more questions, questions, then we will, and thank you everybody for your nice comments as well. They weren't all questions, there were some nice comments. So thank you for that. All right, so if there are no more questions, then I'll sign off. Let me go to the last slide here, and I will announce what is happening next for CAP webinars. Let's see. Tuesday, October 11th, we have 10 ways to optimize your CAD/CAM workflow, and that will be with Ryan Knight and Jay Bergeron, both brilliant guys that work here at CAP. They know a ton about a lot of different things and are really good. That'll be at 11 o'clock in the morning. And then Tuesday, November 8th, Grow Your Lab's Top and Bottom Lines with the one and only Bob Cohen. He's always great to listen to, very knowledgeable, and has taught me a lot of things in the last couple of years since I've known him. So definitely tune in for that. You won't want to miss it. And then Tuesday, December 6th, Digital Dentures, What You Need to Know, and that will be with your host, Matt Vines, who is in the CAP support, also very knowledgeable and really knows his stuff. So 3 webinars coming up in the next 3 months that you really don't want to miss. They're really going to be good. So that being said, I wish you all a happy Tuesday. Today's Tuesday, right? Yep. I'm hungry for lunch. I'm sure you guys are hungry for lunch. And so I will sign off. Have a great rest of the day, and don't forget to contact me if you have any questions, and definitely any tips and advice or tricks for me as well. I'm eager to learn them. Anyway, cheers. Have a good day. Talk to you soon.